Welcome everyone, time for another audio book review. This is Dr. Thor Templar from IGOS, and we're going to cover the book Carnal Alchemy, Magical Techniques for Pleasure, Pain, and Self-Transformation by Stephen E. Flowers, PhD, and Crystal Dawn Flowers. This is published by Inner Traditions. See the exact date of publication of this particular book. Of course, as with many books that come from this particular author, these have been published before. Very little has expanded to it. It was originally published in 1995. This version. So, I mean, as usual, the more outdated information, of course, a lot of this is published by these people just for profit. But it's interesting to understand who this particular author is, and he is a left-hand path Satanist. He's a Setian, heavily involved in the Temple of Set, very close friends with Michael Aquino, who he ran the Trapezoid and still does Order, which is connected to the Temple of Set, which is a Nazi magical left-hand path sadomasochistic organization. Of course, this person was involved in Odinist movements for many years. While I never met him personally, I knew other ones. I was one of the first to expose him to the mass of Odinists. Even though it was not something that he necessarily hid, he thanked Michael Aquino for his great help in runes. And in his main book that he came out with. So it's nothing overly hidden, even though hiding behind Odinism, when you're basically a Middle Eastern Arabic scholar and heritage of such, is kind of a joke. But that goes into a lot of subjects of the fact of that everyone must understand that the runes have absolutely nothing to do with the quote Germanic path, who the Germans are Arabs. They come from the Middle East and aren't even an established country more than 150 years and always were a Middle European country that were tribal based and under the control of others. This didn't change until the defeat of Napoleon, which then established this Deutschland, which is a Persian word meaning people of the land. So the whole idea is that this misunderstanding is very typical of these people who claim some sort of quasi-heritage when they are nothing more than basically part of the Muslim interaction in Europe and directly connected to them, as the country of Germany is connected to the Turks of today and part of the entire area that has to go with, which is the destruction of the Western world by the Turkish Muslim people. But that's a whole nother subject. Getting into his book here, if you can call it that. I mean, the books that come out from the main three people in the Temple of Set are laughable. Michael Aquino's books, Flowers' books, Don Webb's books are so juvenile, it is shocking. There's never any important information in there. They have nothing to say about anything. They don't give you any practical information to speak of because they aren't doing anything very practical. None of them have achieved any great success outside of their government paycheck. Michael Aquino being a wealthy man, mommy left him millions, and being a colonel in the United States Army, which paid him quite well, as the military does of their officers, and in general, basically, considering all the perks the military get. And, of course, the author here, Stephen Flowers, who's been a college professor for many years, has never made any kind of appreciable money from his books or anything outside of the government trust fund baby support system. I'm not sure what Don Webb does, but his books are so childish it's laughable. But as the original book of this, which I got many, many years ago, probably over 20 years ago, this book was originally written in 1995 by a little booklet by him, poorly produced as everything from a college professor was before getting professional printing that is available today. It's interesting that this book would be picked up by Inner Traditions out of Vermont, which apparently is now under the control of the Black Lodge and publishes these kinds of books from known Satanists. I find that very strange, as these people would do pick up these types of books when there's so many things to be about. Not only that, it's dated. It's an old book. You have to wonder why they're doing it. So I allege all sorts of typical publishing industry shenanigans going on there. So the whole idea is that getting into the actual text of this book, I would say this is like a junior high school textbook on S&M that you would have as an extra in sex education class. Flowers uses clinical terms. He's afraid to use any strong language. This is everything in the book. There are no graphic pictures. There's nothing here. It's comical in its low-class, low-level, non-teaching level. But I guess it's all part of his little protection game, even though at this particular time in his life, I'm assuming he's retired from his teaching position. But he makes sure he's written such low-level, such ridiculous books that talk about nothing, and then slap a magical thing on it to give it some sort of credence, is laughable. I mean, apparently he was introduced to this. The whole idea is using sadomasochistic sexuality as a type of sex magic to manifest. Yet he really talks nothing about any kind of sexual practices in terms of magic in this book whatsoever. He gives definition after definition, submissive dominance, what it's about, such low-level how-to information that you could get it off a website. There's nothing in this book that really goes into any magical, serious practices. Apparently, he was introduced to the Marquis de Sade society when he studied in Germany with his fellow Arabs there, and was introduced into all these systems. Or these sexual practices which incorporated. Now, people have to understand the reality of all these things, including the reality of where he trained from. So he got involved in all these black magic German organizations when he went over to Germany to study for a period of time. Germany is the most homosexual country on the planet. There are more homosexuals per capita in Germany than any other place. Most of the city of Cologne, a city of almost 2 million, is homosexual. Homosexuals flock there. It's always been known that the large amount of homosexuals, bisexuals, etc. in Germany, which I guess people don't think of that. Himmler, during World War II, executed tens of thousands of SS for being homosexuals. It was a serious problem, as it is even today, where it's throughout entire. The huge amount of homosexuals, both male and female, has caused all sorts of problems, including the population dropping by 2 million. But we won't get into all of that situation at this particular time. It's kind of another issue, but it does skirt of where this guy's coming from. He claims a lot of backgrounds and stuff, and most of his books are all surface. He's known as a rune author. All his rune books are pretty much almost identical copies of books that were written by Germans in the past and in the 20s. Even his layout of his books is identical to original German text. Yeah, so it's quite interesting as we get into these things. But not surprising from the very surface, uneducated place that the Temple of Set apparently comes from. You can't find any kind of decent literature from them. Anything written by Michael Aquino is the most boringest college term paper written junk you'll ever want to see. There's no insights there, and it's all made up, as he readily admits the fact that there was no tradition to Setian. He made it all up. So the whole idea is that getting into this, but as he says, it's like a junior high school book. He doesn't use any strong sexual terms. He uses clinical terms. He avoids any discussion of bisexuality, homosexuality, or anything else, which is a large part of magical practices, whether people like it or not. He completely leaves out important details about the so-called, and of course, these sexual orders that are out there, like the OTO, deliberately leaving out facts to make sure his book is in his little realm. I mean, you could sell this book at Walmart. It's so boring and has such little information in it, and is so lacks graphics. The fact that he only, in his main text, never even mentions the word bisexual, homosexual, and uses the term pansexual only once in a description of Aleister Crowley, shows you the kind of reality that is. He also stresses the fact that original Garnerian Wicca was heterosexual in nature, which we're not entirely sure of either. So as we get into that, but yet he praises some books that go into bisexuality and homosexuality, you have to wonder if this person, like everything else that comes from this stream of energy, always seems to be hidden, misdirection. They want to get you involved in groups like so many do, and then surprise you with what's really going on. He seems to be possessed by the story of O, a 1954 or 6 book from France dealing with S&M practices. One of the first mainstream books. Of course, there's nothing overly new about it, even though S&M really originated somewhat from Marquis de Sade, who before that, these practices weren't discussed much, but sexuality, which the part of the brain that controls that is right next to your violence center, that sex and violence, even in a controlled manner, certainly heightens sexual experiences other than the sex, which tends to be extremely boring. I mean, there's just so many positions and so many holes, and the point is that sexuality in general is limited in that aspect. The fact of going into sexual practices and sex magic is not really applicable at this particular book review. It gets into a big subject. And there's a lot of cross subjects here, but I'm going to try and stick to this book as much as I can. So, as usual, he doesn't mention any of this, and anyone who sees, in this day and age when you can go on the internet for free and see every possible sex act that you can possibly ask for is online for free for anybody of any age to access. It's just as simple as that. Books like originally 9.5 Weeks that came out in, I believe, the 80s or 90s, at least then there wasn't the prevalence of the internet, but another low level, and you're not going to see the mainstream movies go into this. Actual S&M, domination, submission movies have been around for as long as sex has been around, as long as there's been a pornography industry, print and film. So there's nothing overly new about any of that stuff, obviously. And there's certainly lots of it. In this day and age, it's even more comical with 50 Shades of Grey and these movies that get put on the screen. I guess this is the titillation excuse for those people who want to think it's some sort of mainstream entertainment, or it's a mainstream novel, so you're allowed to read it. This was something that was needed for everyone in the 70s and 80s when there wasn't the internet with the amount of sexuality there. Now it's just kind of, comic book sexuality, anything that's mainstream, whether it's a movie or written, compared to real sexual literature, erotica, etc. So it's people who do this are really sexual cowards that don't want to go out and get involved in whatever practice it may be. In a real aspect, they want to visit it like a comic book. So none of this is talked about. He talks about Aleister Crowley, and of course doesn't talk about really that Aleister Crowley was a homosexual. Since it wasn't legal to be a homosexual in Britain, he didn't come out as that 100%, but he was. Israel Regardie, his secretary, was a homosexual. All of these people were homosexuals, and that were around him, wrote his biographies. Many of them committed suicide. The fact that he hung around with rich women doesn't in any way take away from his homosexuality, which was his preferred sexuality. Aleister Crowley, as soon as he took over the gay, sex magic cult, otherwise known as the OTO, who keeps trying to hide that it's this sex magic organization, homosexual sex magic organization, is shocking. To keep up this illusion and lies perpetrated oftentimes by the OTO and its membership, who wants to talk about everything but that, Flowers talks about the 10 degrees, and he talks about of course, the last 3 degrees, which are the main sexual ones, which he goes only into 8 and 9 and ignores 10 entirely. Well, 10, and he talks about that, 10, which is, 8, which is masturbatory, 9, which is heterosexual, and 10, which is homosexual, which was made sure to be the major and highest degree in the OTO that Aleister Crowley made sure he put in there. Now, there are elements of this before his takeover, being the OTO, which is nothing more than a sex magic club, a German sex magic club, of course, so it means there's lots of homosexualities, dykes, and all the things that Germany is very known for. So, as we get into all that, he ignores that. He talks about these 2 degrees without saying what the last one is. This is the same kind of nonsense that has been perpetrated in so many books, and particularly by the OTO, who doesn't want to come out and say that. Without getting into too much of it, a lot of groups and organizations get you involved, and then one of the major homosexual fantasies is converting straight people into homosexuals, and of course you don't start that way, so they manipulate you through these actual processes. So if you're homosexual, that's not a problem, but people shouldn't be manipulated into anything, sexual or not. Of course, he keeps up this, and I have to wonder what is underneath and what his clubs, and this is nothing more than a book for recruiting people, since he has his own S&M organization, and those are around the country, around the world. S&M practices, including his much glorified and loved Story of O, the French book that I was talking about here, that came out in 1956, I believe. In the 1970s, a movie was made of this, a French movie, what you would call a pornographic movie because it was graphic, was made of this as well. And of course, this deals with lots of homosexuality. That's part of the S&M power game, which he wants to ignore. And of course, the Story of O, of course, was female homosexuality, which of course is accepted pretty much by everyone as acceptable because of the female throughout the ages have always been very personally connected to each other. Women kiss and hold and everything else. So to make this into a more sexual aspect certainly is something that was never overly suppressed and encouraged by males who enjoy that, even though lesbians are really not something that regular heterosexual males ultimately like, and they don't necessarily fit the stereotype that you see in movies. So the whole idea is this again is ignored, and you have to wonder why he's so homophobic, yet he praises pansexuality in one of his reviews in his bibliography that deals with that. So, ignoring these aspects of it, giving very brief understandings of what was going on. There's a huge amount of this in any book written by these people and who they're connected to. They're disinformation to a large degree. There's such candy-coated, undetailed books that they serve no purpose whatsoever. And frankly, after reading many books by all of the people connected to these Temple of Set, I don't recommend any of them. Stay away from it, and they're all just a waste of money. There's nothing in them. Now, this has nothing to do with my own personal belief systems or anything else. There's nothing practical in these books. There's nothing informational here that you can't get for free. He doesn't talk about any particular S&M practices which would generate higher states of magical energies in any details. It's all general. Well, if you get all hyped up because you're into some fantasy and you're creating a more intense and more longer sexual consciousness, this energy is going to be higher in you. Now, the point is, with all these things, which include any high states of energy, the actual using of that energy to magically manifest is near impossible. Tantra and everything else has not produced strong magical states that do anything. Sure, you can psych yourself up. Sure, you can go to high energies levels. But the point is that sex is in the mind, and you have to be in a sexual state, not a magical state, to function properly. So transferring that energy, just like sacrificing of animals, these energies cannot be properly handled and channeled into manifestations. It's just a fact. People want to think that, and it certainly would be nice that you could combine sex and magic together and produce fantastic results. If that was the case, I would believe that the entire world would be empowered magically, considering how overwrought everyone is sexually, with males being completely and totally obsessed by it, psychotically possessed by sexuality, as all males are, because it's intrinsically in them, and society keeps feeding it to you, and the basic lack of interest from the females in general create this even hyper sense. But even if you get everybody together, using these energies and directing them is near impossible. You cannot orgasm and think of a non-sexual route. This is a fantasy that people think may be happening. It's not. Secondly, I'm not sure that these energies do much of anything. They are pretty primitive, low-level energies. And things coming from the root chakra and the kundalini are all energies that carry with it huge negativities to it. Now, as a Satanist, as the writer of this is, maybe he thinks that's okay, but it certainly isn't manifesting anything in his life, and it doesn't seem like his life shows any great manifestations from this. Recently, he had to close down his minor book publishing company because his partner sued him. So not only did he have problems, he couldn't keep that under control in any aspect either. So, I mean, I could go on and on about these people, and those that are interested in this can check out my lectures on the Satanism and the Temple of Set, which I go into, and the people that are part of it. The problem here is plain and simple. This book offers you nothing. As I said, he won't even use strong sexual terminology. He uses clinical terms. The little he does talk about, the book is so basic in terms of what is this and what is that, written for the rank amateur, which I'm not sure why any magical person would be at that particular level. But everything that these people write are for rank amateurs, people that seem to know nothing, have no abilities. Why would you possibly read any of their books? If you're a magical person, I just don't get it. Certainly this gives you no information about self-transformation, the quasi-philosophical things about the use of submission and dominance, and the use of pleasure, pain is something that is certainly not very new. Anytime that you're subjected to pain, endorphins kick off in your body dramatically. So if you're spanked or whipped or whatever, endorphins start being produced in your brain, and after these things are done, combining with sexuality, produce a euphoric high. This is nothing more than a chemical release in your body. Certainly has nothing to do with any magical transformation. Apparently he don't know this either. So if you want low-level, worthless, junior high style information, I would highly recommend that you waste your money on this book. And you can go from there. But you're not going to get any insights here. His bibliography of this book, of where he got information from, is pathetic. He has not read or knows of so many other books on sex magic and sexual sorcery, including those produced by the Guild, who apparently he's too ignorant and doesn't do his actual research properly, which is the case of so many people, because you can't get this book in a library for free. So they never read these things or referencing them, even though that's a fantastic resource guide, as so many other magical sexual books out there that actually gave you practices, talked about rituals, and talked about the bigger sexual sorcery and sex magic out there, the bigger picture. He talks about this when he talks about Wicca and Crowley and some other groups. So the fact that he's ignored so many other traditions just shows his lack of proper research, his lack of information that he's taken from classic books. All of this he overlooks here to put out nothing more than an advertisement for his little sex club to bring in more of people for his personal sexual enjoyment, I'm assuming. So anyone who finds this whole area interesting is not going to find this book of any value. So with that, everyone, remember, you have your own power to create what you want, and there are properly trained, proper systems to use. This is what you should be seeking out. Information should always be taken as just that. This is nothing more than someone's opinion, like any book, and it should be taken as such. To give any credibility to anybody past any level of, yeah, that's your opinion, is a fool's way of looking at things. So until next time, people.